The F1's broadcast directors have once again misconstrued a team radio during a Grand Prix. Is this the F1 broadcast director?
FIA just proved how low they're willing to go after brutally framing Max Verstappen with a fake, censored radio message.
Insinuating that the bleeped word was.
Max made it clear he never said anything explicit because he knows even a single word can cost him. But they twisted the audio anyway, manipulating the truth right in front of millions. So now the question is, how much more are they hiding from the F1 world about their biggest star?
The F word, when in fact he said, well, that was bloody lovely.
Right after Max Verstappen was slapped with that controversial 5-second penalty in Saudi Arabia, Formula One decided to broadcast one of his radio messages. But not just any radio message. A censored version that made it sound like Max lost his mind.
A team radio during a Grand Prix. Max Verstappen this time, after receiving his penalty in Saudi Arabia, was heard on team radio saying, well, that is bleep lovely, when receiving his penalty, of course, insinuating that the bleeped word was the F word, when in fact he said, well, that was bloody lovely.
The audio was clipped right after his race engineer told him about the penalty. And what viewers heard was Max supposedly saying, "Oh, that's fucking great." You know, just enough to make it look like he was throwing a tantrum.
Bloody is normally not a word that gets bleeped out in English.
But here's the twist. That's not what he said at all. According to a full investigation by racefans.net, Max didn't curse. He actually said, "Oh, that's really great." No swearing, no meltdown, just sarcasm. So why did F1 choose to broadcast the censored version that made it seem like he did? That's the million-dollar question. And it's got a lot of people asking if this was a setup to make him look unhinged.
Lap 1, turns 1 and 2, is fair to say, between Oscar and Max. Both drivers making a brilliant launch, but Oscar's just better than Max's, of course. Had the inside line into the first corner. Max opted, of course, to bail out.
Now let's rewind for a second and actually talk about why Max got penalized in the first place. Yes, because that's where this whole mess began. On lap 1, heading into turn 1, Max and Oscar Piastri both launched hard off the line. But Piastri's start was just a bit sharper.
Jumped across the chicane, came back on in the lead, and in the end, a 5-second time penalty for leaving the circuit and gaining an advantage. Lost the lead, of course, when he served his penalty in the pit stop, and well, the rest was written.
He had the inside line, and he was side by side with Max as they entered the corner. Max, instead of backing off or giving space, cut the chicane and came back on track in front of Piastri. From there, he stayed ahead. No position swap, no letting Oscar through. And the stewards weren't having it.
The baseline penalty for leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage is 10 seconds. Of course, Max only received 5. However, given this was lap 1 and a turn 1 incident, we considered that to be a mitigating circumstance.
They reviewed everything: video, telemetry, marshalling data, in-car footage. According to the steward's report, Piastri's front axle was at least alongside Max's mirror at the apex. Under Article 33.3 of the sporting regulations, that meant Oscar was entitled to racing room. Since Max left the track, gained an advantage, and didn't give it back, they ruled that he broke the rules.
And imposed a 5-second time penalty instead. And that's the really crucial thing, is that actually it was only a 5-second time penalty rather than a 10. In many ways, Christian Horner, of course, took some photographic evidence to his obviously post-race media scrum.
Now here's the bit that really gets people heated. The penalty should have been 10 seconds. That's the standard for leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage. But the stewards only gave Max 5 seconds, citing the fact that it was lap 1, turn 1, and calling it a mitigating circumstance. On paper, that's them showing leniency. But in practice, it felt like a middle ground punishment that still cost Max the race.
Bearing in mind as well that driving standards guidelines, which are the 3 words that they've used in that steward's document, which of course emerged out of a number of incidents that have taken place in the past. As far as the stewards were concerned, this was a clear case of a penalty for Max Verstappen.
And here's the kicker. Red Bull even showed photographic evidence post-race that tried to prove Max was ahead before the corner, but the stewards weren't convinced. They pointed out that the photos didn't show the exact moment of the apex, which is what mattered most. As far as they were concerned, Piastri was ahead where it counted. Case closed.
Where there's been collisions or whatever else, sometimes go unpunished. Should this have gone unpunished? In this case, bearing in mind the stewards quite clearly thought that Max had gained a lasting advantage, and in particular that in discussion with his team, he didn't give that advantage back.
But now, stacking that call with a manipulated radio broadcast? Yeah, that's where this goes from a race incident to something a lot darker. Because it's no longer just about a sporting decision. It's about how Max Verstappen was presented to the world after it, and whether that presentation was fair, honest, or straight up deceptive.
Because he opted to stay out in front and try to build on that advantage that the penalty was implied. So, as I say, it's 6-1, half a dozen of the other. You have to kind of go with what the stewards are saying.
So, here we are. Max got penalized in a situation that's still hotly debated. The radio clip made him look like he snapped, even though he didn't. And the FIA, already under fire for over-policing drivers' speech, now has fans questioning if they're not just enforcing rules, but also controlling narratives.
Max was not happy. A very, very short Parc Fermé interview with David Coulthard, who came on the podcast recently as well. He wasn't happy.
Post-race, Verstappen walked into the media pen, stood in front of cameras, and said almost nothing about the incident. David Coulthard tried to pull something out of him during the Parc Fermé interview. He didn't bite. Then came the written press. Same story. When Tom Clarkson asked him about the moment, Verstappen gave a short answer and made it very clear. If he said what he really thought, he'd get punished. And he wasn't exaggerating. This wasn't just paranoia.
A race-deciding moment because obviously Max remained in the lead up until he served his penalty at his first pit stop. Oscar took the lead and, was in cruise control really from then on and also now.
Verstappen was speaking from experience. After the 2024 Singapore Grand Prix, where he let slip a 4-letter word over team radio, the FIA slapped him with a community service punishment. That wasn't a fine. That was an actual formal penalty for swearing during a high-pressure moment in a sport that thrives on high-pressure moments. Since then, Verstappen has gone quiet, too quiet, because under FIA President Mohammed bin Sulayem, new rules were introduced that changed the game entirely.
It's fair to say that Max was not happy. A very, very short Parc Fermé interview with David Coulthard, who came on the podcast.
Drivers are now told that public criticism of the FIA or repeated unprofessional behavior, like swearing, could result in a 1-month ban or even deductions in championship points. That's not a theory. That's what's written into the rulebook now. So when Verstappen said, "It's better if I don't say too much," it wasn't just a throwaway line, it was a defensive strategy.
Oscar took the lead and, was in cruise control really from then on and also now claimed the lead of the standings. He's got a 10-point advantage, but it's fair to say that Max was not happy. A very, very short Parc Fermé interview with David Coulthard, who came on the podcast.
And here's what makes it worse. Verstappen wasn't the only one noticing the inconsistencies, because just a day before that infamous Turn 1 incident in F1, there was a strikingly similar situation in Formula 2. At the exact same circuit, same lap, same kind of move, same result, different outcome. Richard Verschoor, also Dutch, also gunning for a win, cut a corner and retained the lead in the F2 sprint race. Sound familiar? It should, because it was nearly a carbon copy of what happened between Max and Oscar Piastri. Except in Verschoor's case, the F2 stewards let it go. No penalty, no drama, no discussion.
Max has become very, very careful with what he says when it comes to the FIA press conferences in particular, bearing in mind what happened with regard to the swearing situation at the Singapore Grand Prix last year when...
And before anyone says different circumstances, here's the key. Both moves happened on lap 1. Both involved retaining position by cutting a corner. Both were reviewed by race control. The only real difference? The people doing the reviewing. F2 and F1 don't share the same stewarding panels. So while Max got nailed with a 5-second penalty that cost him the win, Verstappen got a free pass.
Why he didn't want to elaborate any further. Hopefully, when we get to Miami and Max is just sat in front of the written media in the Thursday drivers interview session there, and he won't be in the FIA one because he was in the FIA one here.
Now, Verstappen didn't mention Verstappen directly, but everyone in the paddock knew what he was hinting at when he said, "People can't handle the full truth," and "You can't be critical in any form." Because what Max was dancing around wasn't just a racing incident. It was a pattern where inconsistency isn't the exception, it's the expectation. The fact that Max held back from referencing the F2 case shows just how fragile the situation really is. He knows that even hinting at double standards could be seen as bringing the sport into disrepute, which, under FIA's new regime, is a charge that can carry real consequences. So instead of speaking out, he went silent, not out of fear, but out of self-preservation. And this isn't just about Max. It's about the fact that in Formula One right now, drivers are being trained to shut up. Not just about politics, or sponsors, or drama, but about race control, about actual rulings, the stuff that defines whether you win or lose.
In reviewing all that evidence and bearing in mind as well that driving standards guidelines, which are the 3 words that they've used in that steward's document.
When Verstappen chose not to challenge the stewards publicly, he wasn't being passive. He was doing math, championship math. One F1 outburst could cost him more than a race. It could cost him the whole title. And the fact that this is even part of the calculation now says everything about the kind of climate FIA has created under Ben Sulayem.
They do have all the evidence in front of them, regardless of what Christian Horner might have brought to his media briefing post-race.
When Christian Horner stepped into the post-race media scrum in Jeddah, he wasn't there empty-handed. He showed up with printed photographs, physical evidence meant to defend Max Verstappen's position during the Turn 1 drama. These weren't grainy screenshots or vague interpretations. These were timed stills, captured from the onboard and trackside cameras, showing Max ahead of Oscar Piastri as they approached the corner. Horner's message was clear. Max had the lead. Therefore, no penalty should have been given. But the stewards weren't buying it.
Literally, it was just 3 sheets of paper with various photographs of Max actually ahead of Oscar, but you have to think when those images were taken, as the stewards have pointed out, at the apex, Oscar was ahead in relation.
They dismissed Horner's evidence almost instantly, with the argument that the stills didn't show the apex, the exact point of judgment in the incident. They acknowledged Max may have been ahead moments before, but the only moment that mattered, according to Article 33.3, was the positioning at the apex of the corner, where they claim Piastri's front axle was at least alongside Max's mirror. In their eyes, that made it Oscar's corner. Max didn't leave space. He left the track. And that, they said, sealed it. And while we're on the subject of blurry lines, nothing's murkier right now than what drivers are allowed to say. Since Mohammed Ben Sulayem took over as FIA president, the entire culture around speech in F1 has shifted. We're not talking about general professionalism, we're talking about actual rules, as in written regulations, that ban swearing and public criticism of the FI. The updated code of conduct introduced in the off-season came with explicit consequences. Swear during a broadcast or publicly criticize the governing body, and you could face a 1-month suspension or lose championship points. Verstappen has already felt the sting of this. But this time, it's not just about penalties or position, it's about what was said, and more importantly, what wasn't. So, did Max really cross the line? Or did the FIA just blur it for him? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.